What's going on, everybody? Welcome to a week one discussion. I'm talking today about some picks that I think will be pretty good for DraftKings week one NFL season here. So, without further ado, I'm just going to go over some of the picks that I think are good value if you guys are playing DraftKings. I'm just kind of trying to hold myself accountable, see how well I'm doing with my process, so we can come back and kind of check our results. So let me first start with my favorite game stack. Game stack meaning I'm going to probably play at least 3 players from this game in my lineup. So to start out there, I'm looking at Aaron Rodgers to Davante Adams. This is a game versus Seattle that I think a lot of people are giving that Seattle defense kind of name recognition when it's going to fall off a little bit this year. In games where Vegas expects more than 50 points, as this game is, we've got some interesting stats on the Packers. Rodgers and his wide receiver 2 have an extremely high correlation of performance in this situation, which we find ourselves in. This gives us pretty good shootout potential, which is always good for fantasy. And I just think it's a good spot to kind of pivot to a Davante Adams, maybe a guy not everyone's looking at. Davante and Jordy have probably similar projected ownership, maybe 5 to 8%. But I would take the cheaper guy here, being Davante Adams, who has higher correlation with Rodgers in this spot. And maybe we can use that money elsewhere to get some higher value guys in later. Now, on the flip side, if I'm going to stack a game, that means I got to have some Seattle guys coming in. And I'm picking Paul Richardson this week. Kind of a name that maybe is a little bit off the board. But Rodgers' opponent's wide receiver 2, so the wide receiver 2 on his opponent, has a .95 correlation with his performance. So basically, if we think Rodgers is going to have a good game, situations like this where we've got a close spread and a high number of points, the wide receiver 2 on the other team has correlated really well with Rodgers. So assuming, if we do some if-then statements, if Rodgers has a good game, then most of the time, Paul Richardson, a guy in the wide receiver 2 spot, should as well. And he's been named the wide receiver 2, and is projecting at like 0 to 1% ownership. So we talk about all the time these guys in DFS, getting that 1% guy that goes off. I just feel like this is a spot where it could happen based on the data. So let's move over to a wide receiver with some upside. And I'm picking Rashard Matthews out of Tennessee. Another game, the high implied total with close spread. Think it could be a shootout. And here's a name that may be off the board for some guys. So we've got a 51.5 point total for Vegas with a 3-point spread, which is great going up against Oakland. Extremely good correlation with for Marcus Mariota with any of his receivers and his tight end actually in this spot. Like Delaney Walker this week as well, but I think Rashard Matthews is a guy that can have a good game as well and not have near the people that are on him. Likely low ownership at 2 to 4% is what we're probably looking at. In his last 3 games at the end of last year, he got 13, 9, and 10 targets. Kind of felt like Mariota was syncing up with this guy, and I really just hope to see it continue week one here. Maybe before everyone gets on him, we can jump on early. He's only 4,200 on DraftKings this week. Again, giving us some upside, giving us some value. So let's do some other things we might want to at other positions. So for a discussion on tight ends, I had to pivot here a little bit. My favorite play was actually Cameron Brate for Tampa Bay, but Hurricane Irma coming in has postponed that game, no longer making him a viable, even an option this week. So I've pivoted to Zach Ertz here, a tight end out of Philadelphia. He's kind of my secondary choice. I actually had him a lot in my flex, playing 2 tight ends. So I really like him this week. And we'll go over a little reasons here. So this game has a Vegas total of 48. So still a pretty good amount of points. It's maybe like in the middle, about the 6th highest. Only a 1-point spread here. So going to be a tight game, hopefully going back and forth. And the tight end actually has the highest correlated value with the QB for the Eagles in this spot. So Wentz to Ertz can be a nice play. If you didn't want to play Rodgers or somebody expensive, you could actually play that stack and get a little more money from that quarterback position, because I do think that's a good spot for them to be set up for. And over his last 5 games, Ertz has had 16, 2, 8, 13, and 15 targets in those 5 games, and 3 touchdowns in there as well. Last year, Week 17, just went off with those 16 targets. I think he had 2 touchdowns in that game. So getting a lot of looks from Wentz, syncing up. Definitely feel like it's a good spot for him. He's only $3,500 on DraftKings, so a little more expensive than what we had Bray at, but still a really good value. And unfortunately, because of that, he's probably going to have a high projected ownership in the 30 percentile range, which is not ideal, doesn't differentiate us, but he's in such a good spot. I think he's a great play to continue to get that value and kind of let us do what we want elsewhere. Probably the spot we're all thinking, which is running backs, right? So we're talking about all this value. What are we going to do with that value? For me, I can do what I want after I get all this value. I've identified some that I think can go off. Not a lot of people are going to be on, and it gets me to Lev Bell and Dave Johnson, right? So obviously, many people are going to be on these guys, but as many people in the DFS community call this, I'm on team jam 'em in this week, meaning I'll play both Bell and DJ together in a lineup, which is kind of hard to do because Bell's at 9,800, Johnson at 9,400. Both, they're studs, right? I mean, there's no real thinking here, but a lot of people are going to be on them. I'm going to be playing a good portion of them, so is the public. Probably 35 to 40% ownership for both of them individually. But how many people are going to be able to get both of them in the same lineup together? Maybe differentiates the lineup a little bit. I'd say maybe 10% ownership of both together, but we've got to have value in those other positions in order to get to this spot. Not going to do it in every lineup. Probably going to have a lot of them together. I think Le'Veon Bell's in a slightly better position going up against Cleveland. So I definitely think I'll have him individually, mix and match some other running backs. But again, I've identified some other value that I'm comfortable with and a decent percentage of my lineups, and it just kind of gives me some differentiation and ways to get there. So that's it. Here we go. It's week 1. So good luck to anyone who's going to be playing on DK, FanDuel, wherever you're playing this week. You can follow me on Twitter anytime at MPlanup, and I'll look forward to be back here next week looking at results as well as picks for that week. We'll see you guys then.